This is the South and Sideways podcast on the Urban Sentinel channel. I am your host, the Urban Sentinel. This episode is podcast 02, Neo and Technical Feudalism and the City-State. Let's get into it. Now, I said a mouthful there, and I'll break it down for you. Neo-feudalism and techno-feudalism, two different but running parallel types of environments, societies, and the city-state. And with that, where we stand right now in our present day, 2024, the 21st century, moving forward. Now, with neo-feudalism, you have to think about this. Going back plain and simple, feudalism, you think about the medieval period in Europe or in Japan. You had an emperor or you had a king, and you had lords, you had barons, you had a hierarchy of those that were in charge, and under them, all the people that lived on their lands because they were the landlords. And from that, people lived their day-to-day lives doing what they did, toiling away, working for their landlord, and inevitably moving up the chain for the benefit of the king or the emperor, whoever it was. They were in service, in servitude as serfs to that person. With neo-feudalism, it's along the same similar lines, but it's one extent or another less obvious or more obvious. I'm not quite sure where I feel on this, and I'll tell you why. If you think about this, all of us right now, you're listening to this, you're watching this, you are on a piece of technology that is owned and operated by a company, a corporation. You're watching it through a network of systems controlled by another corporation, probably partnered with or owning that other corporation. You are communicating with people, moving here and about. Everything you do is controlled to one extent or another by a larger group. And you cannot do what you do, live the life that you live without their technology, without their aid, in many cases without their permission, because you have to click on that box that says I agree and acknowledge to all the above permissions, and no one ever reads it because they make it 25 pages long. We just click on it because that's the only way you can open up the app or start the program or install the update. You have to agree to it, otherwise it's a brick sitting on your desk when it comes to cell phones and just about everything else that we use. So with that, you will start to see more companies broadening and diversifying, is I believe the proper term, diversifying their interests and their investments into other things. It might be into housing, it might be into food growth, it might be into public transportation, it might be into pharmaceuticals and medical technology, it might be into privatizing more hospitals. If you think about the number of everyday medical and emergency health care and urgent care centers that for the past 5 years prior were popping up all over the place. If there was a shoe store that closed down, next week there's a medical walk-in center that opens up. If there was an old Arby's that got shut down, a week later there's a medical center that opens up. And initially you start thinking there are an inordinately large number of these medical walk-in treatments popping up all over the place. And some of them are owned by the same companies under different names. Some of them are independent chains. Some of them are associated within a grouping network. There are a lot of names and a lot of paperwork running around that unless you're planning on doing the due diligence to bring a lawsuit, it's hard to pin down who owns who, who's partnered with whom, and who is an independent, totally standalone company on their own. But with that being said, then we had COVID. And suddenly now those little hot spots of why are they putting one next to the liquor store over by that old bus station, it became irrelevant because they were the money makers of people running in to get their tests, to figure out what was wrong with them. They were the overflow carriers for a lot of the hospitals that were getting overrun and overworked because they simply were not equipped for it. So you have one hospital that may service 5 towns. And that gets filled up to capacity real quick. And a lot of people don't need to be hospitalized. They just need to be looked at, scanned, documented, treated, and streeted, and sent on their way. Well, if you have these walk-in clinics, boom, there you go. Now, if you are an investor in those clinics, you can make a lot of money that way. If you start looking at the different transportation scenarios that many cities and towns are going through, a lot of municipalities don't have the money in the budget to have mass transit, and other places that do still constantly have problems. Well, you've got companies like Uber, Lyft, Ride, those type of places. They're on a small scale, but I'm sure at a certain point you'll start to see bigger names with bigger budgets taking over or partnering with a lot of the major metropolitan areas for their mass transit, helping them out, getting either more buses to run bus lines or specialized lines, handling the construction or the removal or remodeling of certain transport systems, whatever it is. You look at apartments, and I did notice this in a news story. It was something going on in Korea, but a lot of the buildings, and it's more prevalent in Asia, I see, is companies like Samsung and Sony. And you think of a Korean or Japanese product that has a name that you recognize. You'll see buildings over in those countries with those names on them. But those aren't headquarters, those aren't regional offices, those are apartment buildings. Those are residential buildings for everyday regular people. They're just owned by that company. So it becomes sort of like how limo companies in some regions of the country put their company name on the side of the limo so you can clearly see it, like a decal or a logo or something. And people want to rent certain limos from certain companies because it's more prestigious. It's the same aspect. So now you live in the Sony building, or you live in the Panasonic building, or you live in the Hyundai building. It becomes a certain status symbol. Those companies own the buildings. In the same aspect where right now, Berkshire Hathaway, and I've mentioned them in another podcast, they own a lot of property. I don't even know what they own overseas. I just know that you cannot drive a mile, maybe a mile and a half, without passing at least 10 properties at any point in time that don't have a Berkshire Hathaway sign on it. And even though they're going through a reshuffling and restructuring of things, they still own a lot of single-family houses, multifamily houses, and I believe a lot of commercial property on different size levels all across the country. If they're owning that, and at present either no one's buying it or they're grouping it up and making little tiny fiefdoms out of it, you may have situations where they just outright own gated communities or entire neighborhoods because they've bought and controlled so many houses where they control the mortgage on it or the lease on it or whatever the case may be that they own in an area of a city where, yes, the individual people are just separate and on their own, but they control the property and they control everything around it. And we all know that the larger your company, the larger your corporation, the more money that you have, to one extent, the more advantages you have when it comes to negotiating things with the municipality and with the state that you're in. Because yes, while they want the tax money, they also want the advantages that a big corporation can bring to their area by bringing in more business, more people, more money for them. So they look to be buddies with you as much as possible without making it seem like they're playing favorites. And that's just one of those things that, we have to kind of accept and get used to until we can figure a way to, put a stop to that. But within that, the neo-feudalism and the techno-feudalism, they are both designed to control you, to limit your ability to, one, be independent. Technology as a whole, yes, there are people, and I know people that, I don't use this, I'm not on this, I don't have any of those apps, but they still have a cell phone. Or they still have cable TV, and they still use the internet. They still have technology in their kitchen, microwave, coffee machine, smart this, smart that. It's all there. There are very few people that are living on 1980s technology anymore. Everyone is connected in some way, dependent upon something. And even if you are a person that says, I'm just not going to do that, you'll find it's very hard as you look around to do anything without a certain level of technology. More and more things are scan this QR code, scan this barcode, receive a coupon discount code or authorization code through your cell phone that will then let you into the building, or it will then display your passcode for your tickets to go see the movie. There's a lot of things now that are being more controlled by computers, by the technology, by the programming that you can't get around. It'll get to a certain point, I feel, very soon where, one, cash will be obsolete. It will be obsolete, not in the sense that we've moved beyond cash in the physical sense, but in the sense that it's far easier to make new registers without cash drawers and only have the chip readers and the swipe scan points on them. It'll be far easier because you also have to deal with less cash. And it's not a knock on anyone, but I've noticed that a lot of the cashiers in a lot of places, if it does not have a picture or if it does not automatically tell them exactly what the cost is with the tax, without the tax, and the change they should get back, it is a struggle. It is an absolute struggle. And if you have to count out change, that becomes a problem. Small issue when it's a couple cents here and there. Bigger issue when it's several dollars and you're trying to explain why you gave them $6 for this item that was $4.25, and then them looking at you like, well, if you just gave me this, and then you say to them, well, no, I need this much change back because I still have to go out to the parking meter, and that becomes a whole issue. And even with parking meters, a lot of them around the areas where I'm at are either completely cashless or they still have the slots for the quarters, but you get far less time on them than you used to, which is one of those things where, and again, it basically encourages people to put less change into the machines than it does to just swipe their card and, have it deducted on their time from their card that way. And in terms of our society as a whole, you're going to see that the idea of, while yes, you are not specifically, or at least I don't believe at this point in time, going to be living in a, Amazon complex apartment structure anytime soon, the greater possibility of companies like Amazon broadening their areas into those regions, into, Amazon already is in the food market. It wouldn't be a big thing for them to branch out into other areas of common use, whether it be partnering with a failing drugstore chain that just simply needs a cash infusion, and that will help the drugstore out because you've got Amazon for the delivery, so you can get your food, you can get your meds. You may have Amazon partner with those walk-in clinics. They may start to outfit the Amazon trucks with medical beds, so this way you have qualified EMTs and paramedics can transport you or your loved one from one medical clinic to the next medical clinic. It sounds to one extent kind of humorous and ridiculous, and it sounds like a bad sci-fi movie. But yeah, if this were 25 years ago, definitely, but not anymore, because even though, yes, there's a financial investment on that. One, these large companies have the finances to invest, and they don't even have to invest that much. They just have to put down the concept and how much money they could make from it, and they can get any extra partners that they need or any extra loans that they might need. So if you've got $1 billion that you're going to put on the line for this, you can go to 10 other multimillionaires, 10 other corporations that can each spare $500 million and say, look, I'm putting $1 billion in from my own company. You throw in $500 million, we stand to make $1 trillion in first year of operation. You'll have companies going in. You'll have that idea going out there where, yeah, it is easier if you start controlling all the aspects of everyday life. That makes it far easier for them to get the ideas that they want to you, get the products they want to you, restrict what they want from you. And as I said before, government just wants to get paid. They just want their cut. They want a taste. They don't necessarily want the whole thing, because government does not do well when they operate things. They know this. Every now and then they get a little ahead of themselves and they try to run things, and it does not work out well. Government does best like a sugar daddy, or I should say a sugar baby. They come in, they put their hand out, and the big corporations give them a couple $1 million here, a couple $1 million there, and they're gone for the week and they're happy about it. That's where government is at. So government will gladly say, well, we'll change the rules, we'll bend these things here, we'll let the local committees make a decision, but we'll tell them if they make the wrong decision, they may lose out on federal funding, federal grants, or whatever it is. It's not intimidation. It's just letting them know that there are changes on the horizon. They need to see where the edge of the cliff is before they go off of it. That type of situation can easily go on, and without a doubt, I'm sure it does. We can read news reports and see headlines and know that, yeah, there are many situations where the government blatantly and obviously let some companies get away with a lot of shenanigans, and then they try to offset that by, calling people into a congressional committee and demanding answers to questions that they themselves don't either care about or would not understand even when the answers are given to them, because they're not really actually going to do anything. They just want to make you feel like they're taking charge and that they're in control, when realistically we know that they're not. Now, are they any more control than we are? Yes, they have more control than we do, because they still have the advantage that if we do something out of line, they can just simply say, all right, seize their assets, throw them in jail, and we'll come back to them in a month or two to see if they've learned their lesson. Whereas these large corporations, realistically, and this is a past issue, but when Bill Gates was still running Microsoft and Congress brought him up to answer about monopoly charges and how, Microsoft was telling these computer companies to put us on as the operating system. Me personally, I understand that, yes, you're testifying before Congress and, it's a big thing. But I would have said, okay, number one, they have a choice. They could say no. Plain and simple. Those computer companies could say, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to put yours on exclusively. We'll put yours on certain models, or we'll put yours on the first run of models we have out, but we're not going to hold a single exclusiveness with you. Then number two, I would have pointed around the room and said, I guarantee you, every single one of you reading your notes, going through your memos and everything else, we're doing it on computers with Microsoft operating systems on there. And then point out the fact that, Apple makes computers and they have their own operating systems. So if you don't want to use Microsoft, you have another choice. And if someone says, well, Apple's kind of expensive, well, that's Apple's problem. That's them, not me. Leave me the hell alone. And you guys have a good night. Now, true, Bill Gates himself would never say that. And granted, even if I were in that position and I said that, things would still not go well for me. But it brings to the point that people have a choice. The government has choices and these companies have choices. And when they choose to do things that they know may come back and bite them in the ass, but they're willing to risk and take that chance, then that's the chance that they take. And when that's the government just covers it up by simply either making it legal for what they did or excusing it for that time period, but making sure that no one else does it. Because after all, you can't have other people sticking their hands in the cookie jar and getting whatever crumbs are left over. You look at the way jobs are currently. The economy is not corrected. It's not stable. It's still bad. I am, part of the fortunate group of people that did not lose their jobs, that I maintained work, and I have been working, so I cannot complain about that at all, even though I enjoy complaining about my job. I'm thankful to have one to complain about. But you look at the way the economy shifted things, more people, after they got laid off especially, had to figure out ways to make money and make money fast. In a lot of cases, make money online, doing whatever they needed to do. Setting up rules and regulations for that doesn't benefit the way that it's played out to be. It's simply just another way to make sure that people can't get too far ahead on their own without government approval first. It's almost like if you're at the back of the pack, you can sprint a little bit, but you can't start moving up. You can't skip the middle group. Even if you hold a faster pace, the government has to keep you towards the back because only the big money runners can get up in the front. It doesn't matter that you're not trying to beat them. You're just trying to get ahead and do what's right for you. That can't be. You have to stay in the back with the rest of the slowpokes and trudge it out and lose your ambition, lose your desire, lose your motivation until you subsequently become a shuffler and you're just dragging along day by day, hoping that sooner or later you can get that rest break at the end of the road. Now, when you start looking at the way the economy is going, people also are starting to understand that they need to be a little bit more self-reliant, a little bit more independent. And with that aspect of it in emergency preparedness, that's one of those things where a lot of people during their downtime, during the peak part of COVID, they learned to garden. They learned to make bread. They learned to sew, to crochet. They finally had the time to fix their truck that was sitting in the back of their yard for the last month and a half, 2 months, whatever it was. They learned new skills or improved the skills that they had. They picked up hobbies that initially were just something of a curiosity and became a passion for them. And some of them did get lucky and they were able to translate whatever that was into a tangible work skill, something on the side, a little, cash coming in when you were having absolutely nothing available to you in terms of work, where you were working 3 part-time jobs because you were only getting 10 hours apiece at each job and they were paying you just above minimum wage in most cases to do those jobs, but you needed to get bills paid. You needed to keep food on the table. You started to learn to become more prepared, more self-reliant, more individualistic, and you started to understand that while, yes, there is a need for government in terms of here's the list of the rules, there's the playground, have at it. You started to realize that the government as a whole was not working for you when it came to helping you out of those situations. And yes, they did throw out a bunch of big bones. Everyone got the stimulus check. Everyone, got that little upkeep and boost. And a lot of people bought it on those, those shiny objects that they wanted, but not what they needed. But also, too, it wasn't exactly the best time, depending upon where you were, to start locking down and investing in the long term. Because realistically, at that point in time, that long term, it might not ever come. It might be those situations where you needed to take care of the things in the immediate present moment, get that monkey off your back, get certain things paid off or paid down, or at least try to keep going just a little bit further. So you took that money and used it wisely, but you knew also too that it was not going to last. So you still had to keep struggling. And on the back end of this whole entire pandemic government shutdown, coming up that we have, more people are starting to realize that, yes, if certain things go the way that they're going, it's going to be that type of issue all over again. In the event that there is a formal government shutdown, sure, someone who's working at a fast food chain restaurant isn't immediately going to see or care about anything. Somebody working at a bookstore, not going to care. Somebody working at an auto parts store, not going to care, because initially it's only going to affect those government employees that get laid off. But then it also starts to affect companies that have contracts with the government in those different departments and different agencies. Those people that work for them, the people that were doing the house cleaning and the dog walking for the former government employees now aren't, because they're at home and they can't pay them. You're going to have those companies that did have 30 employees are now going to have to let go 20 of them because they can't afford them. They're not getting the contract work in because they had to turn down other contracts because the U.S. government likes to do that, which is understandable. You get a contract working with them, they want you working with them. Unless your operation is so large that they can comfortably say, okay, you can divest and diverge other employees to do other work, they want your entire company devoted to them in that project. Well, if they cancel that project, you've already turned down 3 or 4 other lucrative deals that could have kept you and your crew working through the rest of the year into the following year. And now those places are all dried up or they've all been filled and you've got nothing. So you've got to start letting guys go. And then you start spreading that out into the grocery stores, into the retail outlets, into all those other places. People start cutting back. And we all know how this spiral starts going faster and faster downhill. And with that being said, when you have this new feudalism going on, when you start seeing these companies that are controlling more, it gives them more advantage. It gives them the advantage that while on one aspect, yes, they may lose money to one extent in certain areas, they offset it in other areas. So now if you are living under the thumb of these new technocrats, you're pretty much done for, because they'll control everything and they'll have you in their housing. So they control what goes on when it comes to moving in, moving out. If you're in an apartment building that is a corporate owned type building, they very well may say, well, we need to put you into a lower tiered unit simply because you can't afford the rent that you're at. So you will still have housing. You'll just be housing in a different part of the building or a different building altogether. Or you may have situations where, you're at the grocery store and that grocery store is part of a new chain that's owned and partnered with some other corporation. And the same thing. You go to scan, the items, they already know how much money you have. And it's not to say that you can't buy anything, but they also know how much money you have, what's on your credit or what's on your established allotment, because they'll have you using store-specific cards. So you can't just swipe your own debit card. You have to use that new corporate card or new commercial card specifically designed for that. So using, again, the Amazon as the example, Amazon gift card and Amazon credit cards, things like that, they may have something along the same similar lines that you would use to purchase within all of their different businesses that they use instead of using cash. So while you may get paid cash in hand and you put that into your bank account and that digital money goes into their account and then that's what you utilize, you can't get anything out. And it's not to say that it's going to be a complete dystopic world. And yes, the US government would not appreciate other coinage, other monetary systems being active. They still want to be able to control that. They still want to be able to have their fingers in the cookie jar with that. But they will allow it as long as they know that they can either get some of that or they have a way to benefit from those types of transactions, whether it's in fees, whether it's in some type of interest earning situation, a small portion of the money that goes into those accounts funnels into another account. And yes, it does sound like a scheme. It does sound like a convoluted racket. But we also know that that's exactly what it has always been. It's been a racket, a scheme set up to control people. When you talk about the city-states, which I had mentioned at the very beginning, city-states is exactly what you think of when you think of Athens or Sparta. You think of the old Greek cities, or you think of Venice and Florence in Italy. You think of a city, you think of the Vatican. It exists within a nation, but it runs itself. But you also think in the modern terms of the Vatican City right now, but you also think of Monaco or Singapore. These are modern cities that are self-sustaining. They operate within the rules of their country, but they effectively govern themselves. New York City, as poorly as things are going there, to one extent or another, is a city-state. Now, granted, they are at a certain, shall we say, hinge point because they can't survive on their own agriculturally. So they would have to either seize a larger portion of Long Island to make that a growing field, or figure some other way to get water in from a lot of the lakes up in upstate New York. But financially speaking, New York City provides more money to the entire state of New York than all the rest of the cities and towns effectively do, because if their money stops, the state of New York is done for as a whole, financially speaking. They rely on New York City. So that gives New York City that sort of leverage in play. And it's a balance point. New York City says, hey, we make the big money for you. And New York State says, yeah, but we control the rest of the highways and the roads and the waterways that get you the water and the food that you need to stay alive. So it's a dealer player push in that aspect. But with newer city-states arising, you're going to see, in some areas, you'll have towns that work together on that township format. They share a larger common council. They may have their own independent mayors and their own city councils, but then selected members or delegate members from those meet up and they talk about group issues that the towns share. Maybe they share a common water supply, or they share several highways, or a train rail system for cargo or passengers that runs through there, or they have a common use airport or something. They look to work together, much not unlike what they do now, but they'll be doing it in a manner that it is more inclusive to just them, where they look to becoming less dependent upon outside areas, outside sources from even within the state, so they can operate on their own, make their own rules, and do things the way that they want to do without having to go to the state for permission, without having to go through the process and the paperwork, the bureaucracy, the irony of bureaucrats not liking the bureaucratic process, but not having to go through that to just be able to get things done the way they want to get them. You're going to see areas across the country start to do that. Some cases, it may not be immediately noticeable because you're not there. It's that area that you pass by, that gated community out at the far end of the golf course on the other side of the shopping mall. You may not think anything of it until later on, when that gated community, the company that owns it, buys up the rest of the land around the golf course and then builds up some more housing on the other side of the shopping mall, and then takes partnership within the shopping mall. And because the shopping mall was on its decline, which is a definite thing that is going on across the country when it comes to brick and mortar retail, it gets converted into alternate housing or mixed use, something that is more relevant and more convenient for the people that live out in that area. So even within the confines of an existing city, you suddenly have this little enclave all on its own. They've got their own little recreational area. They've got their own little mini city hub that used to be that town end mall. They've got their gated residential area, so you can't even just casually walk over there. It's completely sealed off. They own the rest of the land around it, and they fenced that off and made it a wildlife preserve so they can officially put up fencing to keep everybody out. And they live the life that they want to live. They have the resources because they have the finances. And as long as they give their little tribute payment to the town and to the state, they get left alone. And you'll see places like that start to build up all across the country. You'll see even in big cities like New York, neighborhoods that become more exclusive, and it's simply not even just a matter of financing, it's a matter of the physicality. You'll have these apartment condominiums that go for millions and millions of dollars become more self-supporting, where they're no longer building them just to build these huge 10,000 square foot condos. They're building the buildings to house shops and stores, small offices, especially for individual moneymakers, entrepreneurs, that basically they work on the go. They work wherever they are. That's where their business is. But now it provides them little loft businesses and offices when they actually need to have a physical meeting with people that want traditional, sit down at the table, look at the contracts, have the lawyers sign over this, that, and the other, and keep everything nice and formal, or to even do a presentation, a gathering of things. You're going to see more situations where even in large cities, blocks and neighborhoods become almost autonomous on their own. They become self-supporting to the extent that the people that live there live there, work there. If they have kids, their kids go to school there. Private institutions pop up, or even collective tutoring. So you have qualified tutors that effectively live in an apartment, live in a unit someplace in that neighborhood, and they just have a teaching schedule where a bunch of the kids meet up at the local park within that community, and they do some teaching outside, or they do some teaching in one of the work labs in one of the buildings. So they're going through the school system, meeting the requirements, but they're no longer in school, in public school, and to one extent it costs a lot less than a private school does, because you're just paying for effectively a Groupon for 1 or 2 private tutors to teach the necessary subjects and requirements. So it's almost like hybrid homeschooling, where you're not the responsible one to teach them, but they're still learning on a more one-to-one basis. Now, what they're learning is entirely up to you and the tutor, but that's what it comes down to. So you can see that idea start to develop more and more on a broader level, where it becomes almost mainstream. And that's the key thing. When a lot of this stuff starts to seem normal, when it becomes, oh yeah, I've heard about that, or my cousin knows someone who does that, or I have a friend that lives in that area, or I in fact am over by one of those places, that's when you realize that it's starting to spread, that they're starting to envelop and expand that control level. So you have those enclaves within the cities, or you have the cities that act as their own individual states, and region-wise, you have entire areas that are controlled by, again, a small number of corporations controlling a lot of the resources individually. So you have, and it's not to highlight and harp on him, but he just keeps popping up. You have Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation, or whichever one of his agencies that has been buying up all the farmland. You're buying up a lot of this arable farmland on one hand, and on the other hand, you're talking in different reports and interviews about the nutritional value and the expediency that people can get from bugs, from eating insects, and pushing that level of, oh, this is better for the environment. Instead of eating cows and chickens that take up all this land, I'll just buy all this land, and then I'll start pushing a bug protein agenda, because it's a lot easier that way. And it's one of those situations where, again, you chuckle, you laugh, you can say, well, that's not really what's going to happen. And it very well may not happen, but it's one of those things that you also think to yourself, is it just strictly a financial investment? Because owning just land to own land doesn't make you any money unless the land has a value that someone's doing something with it or wants something for it. You can buy an acre of land anywhere. It might cost you $100, it might cost you $10,000, but the value, it really holds nothing until someone else comes along and says, yeah, your 1 acre of land is right where we want to build a major parking facility. So we need it. Well, how much are you going to pay for it? Well, we'll give you, 3 times what you paid. Oh, sorry, not going to happen. All right, we'll give you 10 times what you paid. Oh, I don't know, maybe later. That's when it has the value. When you have that land and it's either something that someone wants or you're doing something with it that increases the value. So if you've got farmland and you've got thousands and thousands of acres of it, you're either going to make money from growing food on there, or you're going to make money leasing that land back to people to grow food on there. So if there were to be some type of major catastrophe where there was a virus that swept through the avian population, swept through the bovine population or the swine population, and decimated it 10 times over, and now you've got all this rich arable land that you can start growing feed crop and grazing crop back up. Or you can pivot over to, we're going to have hatcheries for 10 million pounds worth of insects every month to be ground up and turned into a meal protein bar, and we're going to ship that out through our partnership with this other company and everything like that. These are definitely ways where the technology of the corporations and the devices that they use and their existence can hold sway greater than what the government can. And in many cases, as we all know, because it's in the news every other month, that there are plenty of politicians that get caught taking extra gifts, gratuities, or giving out information to companies about certain laws that are coming in, certain regulations that are going on. And on the other aspect, these companies also give them a little heads up on, we're going to acquire this company for this reason, and we're going to break up this company for this reason and sell off the pieces to these companies, and this will benefit them for this and them for that. And they make their little dirty dealings, and that's why you can have any career politician in the U.S., quite honestly, my opinion, just my opinion. But if you have been a U.S. Senator for more than 3 terms, if you've been a member of the House of Representatives for more than 4 terms, you should not be having a net worth in the millions that the way many of them do. And I don't want to hear savvy investment of your government paycheck. I don't want to hear that. Book deals and book signings, again, no. These are investments that you make money from because you help either make or break the laws that affect these large corporations. And that's where you get the money. And it's, prove me wrong. Just prove me wrong, because I highly doubt someone that has been in office as long as some of these politicians have, and have the enormous bank accounts that they have, simply got it from putting away an extra 10% of their check and the government matched it with a 401k. I highly doubt that that's the case. But with that being said, the control that these agencies will have varies to one extent based upon what they're charged to do. And when you have large enough corporations taking control of it, just like if you think about the war in Afghanistan, yes, we had U.S. soldiers on the ground fighting, flying in the air, doing all that sort of stuff, but we also had large numbers of contractors. And I don't mean the gunslingers in terms of the private military contractors. I mean food service contractors, cleaning contractors, doing all the other jobs that, while yes, the U.S. military has people with those job categories, they only have a small amount. So it's a lot easier to hire a company that can drop in, 100 workers, 1,000 workers, whatever it is, to get that job done, than you take, even if it's their job, 10, 20 people from that MOS to put them into doing that, when you can spread them out to other bases, other places, and have them work lead, in some cases, over those contractors, supervising them, or put them in smaller locations where it's just the military personnel as it is. So we use contractors for everything. Some cases it makes sense, other cases it does not, but that's neither here nor there. But that's what it'll come down to, is these companies will start off with contractors and smaller companies and either outright own them or partner with them where they're funding them. So the name on the van or the letterhead on the business sheet says one thing, but they're getting their money, their support, their financial supplies from some other company. So they effectively work for that company. They are a part of that company. And just like with feudalism, they become the arm and the enforcement within that corporation, that they go out and they do the on the ground dirty work. So with companies like Google, like Amazon, Apple, Meta, you have them as the bannerhead. We know them, but we have no idea all the smaller companies and corporations that they control, that they have equity in. And again, it's all about making the money. It's all about maintaining that certain status. Buying something, they can buy anything, but if they buy it and it doesn't make them more money, then it's pointless. It has to have a value beyond what you see. So if you're able to buy a corporation, you're able to buy land, if you're able to buy a fleet of vehicles, it has to be worth something to you, or have an immediate way to then make more money for you than what you paid for it. Otherwise, it's a wasted investment. And these individuals that have created these companies and have run these companies, they are not about wasting money. Even when it seems frivolous, there's always a plus. There's always a benefit to them. I mean, sure, they may buy things that they've always wanted to buy when they were younger, when they were poor. I've always wanted to, have this or have that, or live here, live there. And they go and they buy those houses and they have these things. That's fine. Everyone does that. You get a little bit extra. You feel free to spend a little. You go ahead and you do that. But when they make purchases, when they look to advance their corporation, to advance their status, to move forward their ideas to their goals, every single thing that they do is not without a plan. It's not without a justification, a reason to make more money, even if that first step is to make enough money to take the second step and to take the third step, and whatever it is they have to do. And if they can control a greater environment, a greater audience, a larger population, through both the technology that's being used at the cash register, and on the internet, your cell phone, in the cars that you drive, in the programs and software that run everything, whether it's being in the places that you live, the places that you work, you go to get educated, you go to the hospital, you go grocery shopping, you go to the movies, whatever it is, even down to building small communities within existing cities, within existing communities, and expanding the control, getting those municipalities to cede control to them, because they go, hey, our city was, our city was going under, and we partnered with this company, and now we've got this, we've got this, we've got this. We've figured out all these problems. We've been able to lower the tax burden for our residents, which then the residents are happy about. Say, hey, yeah, I'm paying less in taxes, because they ceded control to that private industry to take control over it, to have dominance over it, and they become the new landlords. They become the new owners within that community, and they start building out from there. And again, it's nothing that is going to be, right off the top, bang, start a gun, here it goes. Many places you see it, it's small, it's innocuous almost. Some places it's a little more obvious, but it still fits within it. But you'll start to see and start to look for those things and start to realize that, yeah, it kind of feels this way. It's sort of like when the banks started merging and car companies started partnering with each other, and then they started merging and other industries started partnering. And that's how it always goes. It becomes a partnership where it's 50-50, then it becomes a merger where one stays as the figurehead, the name that you recognize, and the other one is behind the scenes doing the work. And then it becomes, oh, this company is no longer here, it's dissolved, but we've taken the same concept and the same everything else that they're doing, and we've made 3 or 4 of these little subsidiary companies, which are actually under the control of the original company, and it moves out from there, and you forget about that first company. It's sort of like, and this is dating myself a little bit. When I was growing up, you had Ma Bell. That was the phone company. It Bangor, Maine to Baltimore, Maryland, all the way down to, Athens, Georgia. It didn't matter. It was Ma Bell. Broke it up. Government said, you are too big. You're a monopoly. We're going to break you up. And then you had every phone company under the sun pop up within 5 years. You could get a different phone company going down to the end of the block. It didn't matter. But year after year, decade by decade, one company partnered with another one, bought out a third, closed down a fourth, merged with a fifth, until it got to a point where the phone companies went down to, I believe there were 3 of them at one point. And then at that same time, cell phones became the thing, and you had all these different cell phone companies. But the same thing again. You think about it now, that realistically, coast to coast, we probably as a nation have 4 or 5 major cell phone companies of independent networks. That's it. And not even of those 5 are all of them coast to coast entirely. Some have large geographic regions, which I think there's 1 or 2 in the Midwest area to Southwest area. But, you say Sprint, T-Mobile, you say AT&T, you say Verizon, even when you say things like Boost, which, when Boost started, at least out here, it was a tiny little thing, but now it's become a larger player within the network. And I believe they're partnered with one of the other big guys. And so that's the way it goes. You get it to a point where it doesn't matter who you pick. It doesn't matter if you say, well, I'm going for this company here or this company there because I don't like the other company. They may very well be part of that other company. They either are an equal partner or they are a controlled partner, or they may be the controlling partner. So whatever it is that makes you not like that one company, it just might be something from the rules and regs or the origin of another company. You can't quite get away from it. But these are all things to think about. These are all things to look at that will be occurring as you go along. And as I said, it may not be dramatic. It may not be very obvious, but it's still there. And so with that being said, feel free to check out the next podcast, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.